We are back with another episode of Healthy Thriving Family After Divorce. Stephanie Dobson is with us once again, and Stephanie is a lawyer and mediator at Hanka Divorce Law and Mediation here in Lloydminster. Stephanie, thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks again, as always, Stacey.
Well, we have a unique subject to talk about today, and that is what happens to your pets when you're going through a divorce or separation. This is really a big issue because sometimes, I hate to say it, but people love their pets more than their family sometimes. So we're going to get into it and talk about custody. So, what happens with a pet? Does it work like with kids? Can you set it up where you have custody of a pet just like children? Or I guess, how do we even broach that subject?
Good question to start with, Stacey. There's no such in the legal field. There's no such thing as custody of a pet, like you would call, the term. And we don't use the term anymore in the legal field, but custody of children. In the legal arena, a pet is actually considered to be what's called personal property. So it's actually divided in accordance with the rules of property division, the same way. I'm sorry to say, the same way like a bank account or a house or even a toaster and a blender would be divided. It seems very crass, I know, to think of our most loyal friends. Sometimes we can call them to be treated like that. But it's a very difficult thing to look at it that way. But that's the way that the law looks at it. So we're going to look today in our interview about just some different ways that we can look at things other than the pets, other than what we call property.
Now, does court have to get involved or can they get involved at some point when you're dealing with pet custody?
So courts can always get involved and they would treat it like a property dispute. So who is going to keep that asset? And we'll call the pet an asset, not a liability. And the question, of course, would be then who would be the owner going forward? So it's not necessarily about sharing the pet. It could be, I suppose, but it's more about ownership of that asset. So how does this ownership get determined? So there's lots of different factors, and this is just thinking about it from the point of view of if you had to go to court, what would a court look at? So, whose name is on the receipt for the purchase of that pet? Is there evidence that would suggest that the pet was gifted to one of the spouses? Or, even so much as when you go to the vet's office, who's the one that brings the pet into the vet most of the time? Whose name is on the account at the vet's office, or who generally takes care of that pet? We like to think that it's the kids that generally take care of the pets, but when we're talking about the adults, who sort of has that allegiance. So this list, of course, is non-exhaustive, but it does give you a flavor for what would be looked at if we're looking at it from a strict legal point of view, property division point of view.
Now, I imagine that most people don't want to take it to court if they don't have to when it comes to figuring out what should be happening with a pet. So, I guess, what are the other options if you don't want to go through court but still need to get this sorted out?
Almost like a broken record here, I'm hoping that our audience is starting to get the idea that there are ways to keep really every dispute that you have outside of the courtroom. So there's options like mediation, collaborative divorce, trying to figure it out yourselves at the kitchen table. Of course, there is divorce court, but again, to try to keep it out of the court, you may want to try to get a professional involved. And when we do that, we want to try to find a mutually acceptable resolution. So it may not necessarily be one person keeps the pet or the other person keeps the pet. It might be somehow figuring out how to share that pet. I've even gone into sometimes where it's agreed that one person is going to keep the pet primarily. The other person will have the pet when the primary pet parent goes on holidays or can't otherwise keep the pet. They'll have the right of first refusal to keep the pet. But also there's the cost of the pet. So sometimes we look at one person keeping the pet, but both people sharing the cost of the pet or something like that.
So, if you don't have plans for separation or divorce, is it still a good idea maybe to plan for what should happen to a pet in the event of the fact that something happens with the relationship?
Well, I would say that this would be my advice for all couples, whether you have a pet or whether you have children, whether you have property that you're looking at putting together. It's always a good idea to plan for the future, whether you stay together or whether you end up separating, or whether one spouse ends up passing away. So the same thing like any other property or children, you might want to plan for your pets. So why not write down the intention when that pet is purchased? Right? If such a thing should happen in the future, any of those incidents that I mentioned, would you continue to share the pet or not? What are you going to do about major decisions around the pet? I know this is sounding like parenting a lot, but that's really is the case. What's the pet time sharing schedule? And then, of course, what about the finances?
All right, Stephanie. Well, again, a really great subject, something we haven't discussed yet, and what happens with pets and when people go through these situations. It's just sometimes one of those things that is not thought of. So I know that we talk about how your office can really get this all sorted out, no matter what the subject. So how do people reach you, Stephanie, if they are looking at needing to make these types of decisions, or the tough ones around actual relationships as well?
Well, I encourage people with anyone that they're going to go see for separation or divorce is to make sure, or even for planning for the future, like we talked about a moment ago, really important to do your research. We have lots of information on our website. So check out our website, henkadivorce.ca. On our website, we actually have the live chat feature that will send us an email and let us know that you want us to get in touch with you. Or you can give our office a call, 780-875-2234.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us once again, Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stacey.